State Appropriations Chairman, representative from the 94th Legislative District. He is Stan Saylor, and he joins us here this morning on WSBA. Good morning, Stan. How are you?
I'm doing great, Gary. I can't imagine you browbeating anyone.
I know. It's hard to believe, isn't it? I mean, I can't even, I can't think about it. Over the years I've known you, we've never browbeat anybody, have we? I mean, we're just very nice.
No, never. Yeah.
That sounded sarcastic. That was terrible. I mean, I can't believe you said that. Anyway, good to have you in this morning. Interesting times in which we live, my friend. For a lot of people this morning, they're trying to figure out and make sense out of these suits that are being filed right now in Pennsylvania. I know Republicans have expressed concern. You've talked about that before. But I wanted to get into, can you make some sense for us on what is going on and what the questions are regarding the election in Pennsylvania right now?
Yeah, a little bit. Look, the biggest problems have been, as always, in Philadelphia. I mean, it's no secret. Philadelphia and Chicago are the two most corrupt cities in the state or in the country. They've been known for stacking ballots, stuffing. We just had earlier this year a judge of elections indicted for stuffing 25,000 ballots in and helping judges and others win elections in Philadelphia.
Right.
So people want to be able to observe in Philadelphia. And, for instance, in Philadelphia, they were denying people the opportunity to observe, as I've been hearing is happening in maybe Las Vegas as well.
Mm-hmm.
When you have that, when you're not open and transparent, people have a tough time believing the results. And some of these lawsuits are exactly that. Stop the counting until we can have somebody there watching what you're doing to make sure that you are counting legitimate ballots of people who are really alive. I mean, in Philadelphia, we've had cases in elections, for instance, back when President Bush was running, 102% turnout.
Mm-hmm.
We've had Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse vote in Philadelphia. So, look, I'm not saying everything is corrupt out there. It's not. Many of the county commissioners across the state of Pennsylvania do a great job. They're very open about their process. Philadelphia, for some reason, and even Allegheny County to a certain extent, although they're not as bad as Philly, sometimes play politics with elections. And you really, once the ballots are cast, there should be no Democrat, Republican politics be either party. It should be strictly everybody gets to observe to make sure everything is legit. And that's why I think these lawsuits are going on, is basically because certain individuals in the election process are trying to hide the ballot counting, and to make sure they are legit, people want to observe it.
When you look at what's going on, I know Republicans have been very upset with the Secretary of State, Secretary of State Bakfar, and also, to some degree, the Attorney General, Shapiro, on some comments that they made. And again, when you're a public official and we're in the midst of an election, even if you're running for election, we were talking with Dave Sunday, our district attorney, about this yesterday, there's a certain standard that you have to kind of make sure you're aware of so it doesn't look like you're becoming more political than you are doing your job. Thoughts about that?
Absolutely. I mean, Josh, I know Josh. I like Josh Shapiro as a Democrat. He's a good guy. I don't necessarily always agree with him politically in most cases, but to be honest with you, he made a statement that really jeopardized his independence if he were to ask to be doing anything in this process. He was up for election. He needed to stay because he should resign. The Secretary of State went against the Supreme Court ruling of Pennsylvania and how to handle elections. But even worse, 3 days in a row, she changed her mind on different things that she had already told each county on how to process and handle this election. Now, as Secretary of State, you cannot be sending out different messages every day on changing what you've already told election officials to do. It's an embarrassment. I think Pennsylvania is an embarrassment because of the way the ballots are handled. And I think of this as a young man, before I was even able to vote, York County and across this whole state, we all did paper ballots, and they were all counted by hand.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the same day, we have to wait 3, 4, 5 days to get results. Now, how does that make any sense? Computers are supposed to help us speed the process up. And here, when people were counting them by hand, one at a time, we were able to get election results the same night.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of suspicion that goes on out there with this process because it doesn't make sense.
We're talking with Stan Saylor, state representative from the local area here in 94th Legislative District, also State Appropriations Chairman. You said that Secretary Bakfar went against the Supreme Court. Talk a little bit about what she did that caused so much angst for people, in addition to setting out the different thoughts each day. But what did she do to go against the Supreme Court? Because it had to do with how these things would be counted and when they would come in, these mail-in ballots.
Yeah, I mean, the Supreme Court laid out very clear how the whole election process should be handled. And, whether I agreed or disagreed, they made their ruling, and that's the way it is. Well, the Secretary then changed that illegally, in my opinion, and as Secretary of State, you have to follow a court ruling within reason. If you need to clarify it, that's something different. So that's where I think everybody's having problems with her, is the county commissioners were being confused because she constantly kept changing it. And so when a Secretary of State who seems to be very, very political based upon everything I've seen, is not a very independent person just because of her behavior compared to a lot of other secretaries of state, and that includes Democratic secretary of states across the country who handled this election very well. I thought both Democrats and Republican secretaries of state across this state, except for a few exceptions in some of these states, did a very good job in making it very clear to voters and everybody else how this election was to be handled. And in the case of the secretary, she just constantly was changing not only her own rulings, but that of the Supreme Court. And you just cannot have that.
When you look at Pennsylvania right now, and you look at York County, for example, it looks to me like York County did a pretty darn good job this time around, outside of maybe Northeastern Middle School over in East Manchester Township. I mean, things seemed to go pretty smoothly. Where I was at, it was like a well-oiled machine. Hats off to Julie Wheeler, especially, and the county commissioners who were. Julie was out there seemingly everywhere trying to make sure things went smoothly. Your thoughts about that and what happened in York County?
Yeah, I think our county commissioners did an amazing job. And I give kudos also to people like Barb Bear and a number of our row officers who helped pitch in, not only themselves, but their staff to get this election handled so well. So many people. And I give Julie and Ron Smith and Doug Hoke great credit for the way they handled this. They were very well prepared to handle it. In any election, there are going to be problems. One of the problems I took notice to Election Day was back in the primary when people asked for absentee ballots, Gary, there was a spot on there. People forgot they checked that and ended up, or they didn't think they checked it, and they got mail-in ballots and were upset, wondering why they got an absentee ballot. And it was because they checked that block, and so they were very frustrated. So I get that. We're going to have to figure out a way to reevaluate that whole process of people who do it. If you're a senior citizen who can't walk very well, or you're a person who has health issues that can't get to the polls, whether you're wheelchair bound or whatever, you want to get an absentee ballot every time. Others who may really like casting their votes in person will have to see if there's a way for us to make sure that we maybe notify them and say, hey, do you really want to get an absentee ballot every election? So we're going to have to figure out a way to work that out in all the counties, because that was one of the complaints I heard across the whole state. People had forgotten they had checked that block.
Stan Saylor, state representative from the 94th Legislative District and also the State House Appropriations Chairman, with us here on WSBA. A caller just called in, and I don't know if you even know what the answer is to this, so if I'm asking you a question that you don't know, don't consider it browbeating here, Stan. Anyway, the question was, with Nikki Sakanik on as the head of voting here in York County, there was apparently a guy that stepped in for her, and this person was wondering where that person went, if someone was still in charge there in terms of the elections here in York County. Do you have any inside information on that?
Yeah, there is still. They appointed a new election director I'm going to say earlier this year, back I think in January or February. Okay. They appointed a new director. So it is a director. She stepped aside. She had some other issues that she wanted to take care of personally. And in fact, the assistant director retired as well, I believe. And so, yes, there is somebody in charge of that department.
Okay. So just there's the answer, and we'll talk more to Julie about that tomorrow. Stan, when you look at the results of the elections here in Pennsylvania and what the landscape looks like to you right now, obviously we're still counting. And obviously, there's still some question marks out there. But is it anything starting to come into view here for you in terms of what we have in the state with the election landscape as it relates to the state assembly?
Well, the state assembly passed a bill that would allow the county commissioners to count votes start. Oh, I should say not counting, but opening the envelopes and getting ready to process those election mail-in ballots 3 days ahead of time. That way they were ready. Like I said, York County did an amazing job. They did it all in one day, but we believe those are the things that need to happen to help in the case of years like this, where there is a presidential election where you get this many mail-in ballots. But who knows? Once this pandemic goes away, a lot more of those people who voted by mail-in may not choose to do that anymore. So I think we're going to have to be adjustable. The other thing is we have to make sure that the counties have enough machines to count these votes on the night of elections. There has to be more of those kind of things. We have to make sure that there's more of an open process. I think that's one of the things that we're seeing this election is the issue of transparency, and a lot of people on both sides, by the way, are very concerned about transparency in the counting of votes and what are legit votes. Are there people who voted twice? Are there dead people that didn't? Like I said, we've had a number of instances in Philadelphia. They tend to be the city that these things happen in. I'm not saying it happens all the time, and I'm not saying everybody in Philadelphia is corrupt. I want to make that clear. And by the way, there are places where Republicans are the same thing. Not in Pennsylvania necessarily, but there are areas of the country. We've seen in North Carolina where congressional people or political people were involved in stuffing the ballots in North Carolina back last year, I believe. So
I remember that.
It can happen to both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, and his election was overturned as a result of that. When you look right now at where we are in the electorate, people are starving, I think, to trust the system. And they worry right now that our very systems on which we elect people are not working. I said I was so proud to be a York County the other night, and more importantly, an American, when I stood in line. I only was in line for an hour and a half to vote, which was relatively short compared to what I saw around other parts of the county. But I was so proud to see people standing in line, doing their duty, exercising their right to vote. And the numbers we're looking at, for example, Joe Biden, 70 million plus now, and Donald Trump, 68.6 million votes cast. That's 138 million votes cast and rising. And it's kind of amazing to watch all that. And yet at the same time, we also have questions about this idea of early voting, the idea of drop-off ballots, the idea of and the security of those, and the idea of mail-in ballots in mass. Now, maybe COVID is a once-in-a-lifetime aberration. I don't know. It certainly complicated the process this time. But when we look about early voting and we look about this idea of drop-off ballots and all those kind of things, are they good for our system? Are they bad for our system? What's your thought on that?
Well, I think we're going to have to take a serious look at that. I mean, some states do the early voting where you can start voting on Friday and Saturday. I mean, I'm not opposed to allowing people to start showing up a day or two ahead with certain hours that people can vote. I want to look at that versus mail-in ballots possibly, or standing in line a long time. I want to see how we can make the process work. Definitely the mail-in ballots we have to figure out a way to handle that better and make sure they're more secure. I mean, some people were complaining that a police officer was standing by a box, a sheriff's deputy, I believe, here in York County. Well, we know across the country we've had instances where people were coming up, not Democrats, not Republicans, who were actually pouring gasoline on these boxes and burning all the ballots inside. You have to have security in these boxes. If you're going to do it, you want to make sure that the people, one, who are casting votes are legitimate, and you want to make sure that somebody's there to protect it, make sure somebody doesn't light the box on fire, which we've seen in a case or two.
So I read that same story.
Security, I mean, the security of our election process, to me, is something that we as Americans are the most proud of. We all get that free choice that they don't have in other countries, and we have to make sure that every one of us believe in the process is fair and straight up.
Yep, couldn't agree with you more. And I saw that story about the box, and someone said, well, I mean, I'm tired of hearing that kind of thing. The box is there. If you can't figure out that it's being guarded to make sure that somebody doesn't do something untoward toward it, then you're not really very smart. Stan, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I always appreciate it, and we'll look forward to another time again very soon. And we promise this is a no brow-beating zone, okay?
Very good, Gary. It's always a pleasure to be with you guys. You guys do a great job. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Stan Saylor with us here this morning on WSBA.